بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum. نحن جاهزون.
Conducting this session in English, so please, if you need to follow the translation, the handsets are available. I should also say that this, as with our previous events, will be recorded and then transmitted on Al Jazeera Mubashir, which does require us to keep to a certain code of conduct in terms of swearing words and what have you, which I'm sure will not be coming from our panelists, but just in case if the questions get and those in the audience get carried away, please remember that. Also, we have colleagues tweeting live the event, and we may be receiving some questions via the Twitter. And as we receive those later on in the session, I'll be directing them to our panelists tonight. Tonight, as you have already noticed, I'm not Ibrahim Sharqiya, as was announced in the program. Ibrahim Sharqiya is standing there, but he has lost his voice. I'm not sure what he's been doing, singing or lecturing too much. No, the mind is still there and the body is very much there, and he's given me quite a good guidance as for tonight, and he's free to intervene whenever he feels I'm starting to fail him. We're close friends, and I'm sure it will work out well. The event tonight, we called for it really to try and reflect on the last year of Obama's term. It's very easy for us all in the wake of the elections now in full swing, things are happening in the United States, to forget that President Obama is still with us for another year. So we'd like to speculate and to think of what Obama and his administration may be able to do in the coming year in relation to some very important events that has happened over the last year and the last few months in our region, including, obviously, the continuing situation in Syria, the Palestinian issue, the Iran deal, the Yemen, the Libya, etc., etc. To do so, we would also like to start by reflecting on his legacy over the last 7 years. Are there any particular trends in the way he's done things, in the way his administration approached the Middle East, to tell us that he will or will not be acting in a certain way over the coming year? And from that, we hope to distill some of the lessons, if you like, for us all from the way the United States foreign policy has approached the Middle East over the last 7 years, and what is likely to come maybe after Obama. To do this, we have two extremely distinguished panelists with us tonight who really need very little introduction. But for the benefit of those who are meeting or listening to my colleagues for the first time, I'll just take 1 minute to introduce our panelists. Immediately to my left, in the center here, is Dr. Gregory Gose, who is our own non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Doha Center. He is a professor of international affairs and head of the International Affairs Department at the Bush School of Government and Public Services of Texas A&M University. Gose is the author of 3 books and numerous articles on the politics of the Middle East, with a particular focus on the Arabian Peninsula and the Gulf region. Those of you who follow our publications also will know Gregory through his fantastic papers, analysis papers and policy briefs that he's put through the Brookings Doha Center. He was also a Kuwait Foundation visiting professor of international relations at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University between 2009 and 2010, and a Fulbright scholar at the American University of Kuwait in 2009. So he's very familiar with our region. He is one of the most important scholars writing on the foreign policy within the region. We're also very pleased to have with us Dr. Shafiq Ghabra, who is a professor of political science at the Kuwait University and the founding president of the Jusur Arabia, which focuses on youth leadership programs and strategic planning. He is also the former founding president of the American University of Kuwait, where he served between 2003 and 2006. He also directed the Kuwait Information Office in Washington, D.C. between 1998 and 2002, and the Center of Strategic Studies at Kuwait University between 2002 and 2003. Ghabra is a graduate of Georgetown University, and he's known for all of us here in terms of his wide publications and views on the politics within the region, but also he enjoys a particular knowledge and understanding of the American politics and foreign policy towards our region. We could not have asked for a better two colleagues to be with us tonight, and I'm really pleased that Ibrahim has lost his voice so that I have the opportunity to moderate this exciting session. To start with, I'll start with Greg, if I may. Gregory, is when Obama first arrived, from our perspective, the Arabs, we held huge hopes and pinned the huge hopes on him. He wasn't only the first Afro-American president to emerge, he emerged in a way and he spoke the language where we thought he understood our issues. He gave that famous speech in Cairo and then in Istanbul, where he hit all the right wires, if you like, or nerves, and even used the language, and et cetera, et cetera. He came in on a commitment to withdraw troops from Iraq, from Afghanistan, on a commitment to try and resolve the Palestinian issue, and so on. And now he's approaching the end of his term with only 1 year left. And there is a good degree of disappointment that people look at this, well, what has actually been achieved? Right. If you could just, a few words, take us through what has, you think, been achieved and what was it characterized by?
Well, I think the administration itself would say that its biggest achievement in the Middle East has been the opening to Iran, the P5+1 nuclear deal. I think that they would put that at the top of their accomplishments. But I think that this has been an administration that has had quite a few internal inconsistencies in the way it approached the Middle East, and very few kind of fixed principles, or maybe better put, too many fixed principles, and they were kind of in opposition to each other. So this is an administration that wanted to be less involved in the Middle East. That's the withdrawal from Iraq, that's the pivot to Asia. This administration came in saying that America had spent too much time and too much effort and too many resources on the Middle East. But then it kind of fell prey to the same temptation that the George W. Bush administration did. Right? When the Arab Spring started, the administration thought, oh, look at all this change that's happening. Maybe we can direct it in a way that will be favorable to the United States. And I think that this is, in many ways, the same temptation that George W. Bush succumbed to after 9/11 when he said, America can remake the domestic politics of Iraq. And that way led to disappointment. Right? It led to disappointment. The president himself said that their policy on Libya was mistaken. And I think that the results of Libya basically made this administration extremely reluctant to get more involved in Syria. So this is an administration that's driven, one, by a reluctance to get involved militarily in domestic political fights like the Syrian civil war, but it's also an administration that wants to try to direct events in the region. But since so much of the region is now tied up with these domestic conflicts, whether it be Yemen or Syria or Iraq or Libya, it's reluctant or unable to commit the resources necessary to actually drive events. I think that's why they would say that Iran is their biggest accomplishment, because they think that if things proceed down the road that they hope, and they won't be in office when this happens, they see an Iran that is, as it were, back to acting as a normal state in the region and not as a revolutionary force. But that's a big bet, and I don't know if that bet is going to pay off. So the administration, I think, we won't be able to really judge what they say their major accomplishment is until many years after they're out of office.
Right. So it's the Iran deal, what they would agree on.
I think that that's what they'd say their big accomplishment was.
Well, let's see if Dr. Shafiq agrees with that. In terms of the Iran deal, it's the biggest accomplishment from the American perspective. Does that accomplishment sort of match from the Arab perspective, from the region perspective, looking back?
It's a complicated situation. For President Obama, it is definitely the accomplishment of his foreign policy, while there was failure on so many other fronts. So this one, he was able to pull. The agreement with Iran is an agreement with an important power. The question, is it a rising power or a declining power? And this we can discuss whenever you want. But basically, it means that Iran gave up portions, important portions of its nuclear program. I think Iran would not have made that deal if the economic situation was not that bad, if the sanctions and the effects on the economy pushed it. There's high inflation in Iran. There is a population that is looking for more, and there is a need for the regime to find a way, and I think it found that way, at least temporarily, through the deal, through the nuclear deal. It gave up something, it will gain something, but what it will gain is not as bright as people think. Iran is not going to be in the lap of America overnight. That's not going to happen. The investments are not going to come to Iran overnight. That's not going to happen fast. Iran is in need of hundreds of billions. I mean, it needs 300 airplanes, new ones, totally. I mean, the amazing infrastructural development, that's not going to happen immediately. It's a country that has been focused on military intervention outside Iran with very limited focus on the infrastructural development of Iran itself. There's some parts of Iran that reminds you of the old Soviet Union. When will this catch up? I don't know. 10 years, 15 years? But there is that dilemma between the inside and the outside. The foreign policy, the interventionist, there is an obsession with militarism on the one hand, but there is on the other hand lack of development and evolution within Iran. And yet in Iran, I think that's where the US policy maybe comes. I think there is a belief that the Iranian people are way ahead. They're a very secular population. In the cities, Iranian youth, 60% of Iran is under the age of 35, while in the Arab world are under the age of 29. We produce more. But it's quite an issue that the Iranian population, that the Iranian people seem by and large more secular than any Arab population that I know of. And it is in this context, they're secular, they're more open, they want to open up to the world, and at the same time, they don't want to rebel against the regime. So nobody should read this as a start of, it's not, they want a good government and they want transparency and openness to the world, but they could surprise us over time with the kind of reforms the population will bring in. And as I look at Iran, I see that the population is ready for that transformation. You look at all the leaders, their sons, their grandsons, even the grandsons of former Imam Khomeini, they're all in the reform mentality. You look at Rafsanjani's family, you look at Khatib, there is something happening within the society that is not happening in every other society in the region that could benefit from the long-term investments coming in. So my answer, the deal is not going to end the conflict between Iran and the US. It's not going to end the conflict between Iran and Zionism. It's not going to let Iran compromise on some basic issues that it is today committed to. And therefore, anything could go wrong. The sanctions will be lifted. The ability to do trade, this whole SWIFT sanctions on banking will all be lifted. Something 5 months, something 6 months. There is a whole set of deadlines. Things will, but at the same time, anything, you could see other sanctions on regional politics. You could see another American president coming and saying, on Syria, there will be these issues. So it is still a very complex and not a black and white situation the way some of us saw it in the Arab world, that America is now in Iran. No, and left the Gulf, for instance, or left its allies, or left its... It's a very complicated situation, and it is... So is Iran the China model? No, it's not the China model. In a simple nutshell, it's not the China model. It's Murshid, it's Khamenei, balances between strong military revolutionary guard on the one hand and all the security apparatus on the other, and then the smaller liberal group today that dominates the government and has a different outlook but doesn't have as much power, and balancing all of this. So it's not the China model, but it's not the old model. It's somewhere in between, slow, however, and many things will happen on the way.
Right. But is it not, in a way, ironic that 7 years on, the only one thing we reflect on as the main legacy of Obama is the Iran deal? When he came in, it wasn't on anyone's books. I mean, we had the traditional issues, the Palestinian conflict, that was number one. We had other important, the Iraq war at the time, Libya was sort of starting to take shape. We are now dealing with legacy that is left with Iran probably better off in some ways versus the Gulf. I don't know, Gregory.
I agree with Shafiq. I mean, I think that the Iran deal has been mischaracterized and misunderstood in the United States itself, not just in other parts of the world. It's become a serious domestic political issue. Not only the Republicans criticizing every Republican candidate, except for perhaps Rand Paul, has basically competed with each other to say how soon they will rip up the Iran deal, right? One of the candidates, I think Marco Rubio, said he would rip it up in the car coming from the Congress after he took the oath of office and going to the White House. He would rip up the deal in the car. Another one said, the first thing I do when I get into the White House is I'll rip up the deal. So there's been quite a bit of domestic political opposition, as we can see. In the Congress, the Republicans in Congress also didn't support this deal. So the Iran deal remains a very contentious issue, even within American politics. And I think it's misunderstood in the way Shafiq said, that this is kind of a complete change of alliances, that the United States is going to abandon its traditional alliances here in the Gulf and back in America. Of course, the argument was we were giving up on Israel because that's obviously the country that has the biggest constituency in the United States. But I think that if we get beyond the Iran deal, and as Shafiq said, it's going to take years for this to work itself out. If the Obama administration is right, and Shafiq is right, over time, Iran is going to become, for want of a better term, a more moderate actor in the Middle East. But that's a bet, right? That's a possibility. I think it's a 50-50 bet. I think there's just as much of a chance that Iran will continue to play a disruptive role, because that disruptive role has brought Iran benefits, right? Iran is the most influential country in Iraq right now. It's been the most influential country in Lebanon for a while. Its ally in Damascus is holding on to power at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives in Syria, but it's holding on to power. And in Afghanistan, the Iranians have possibilities of advancement. And in Yemen, you have a group, the Houthis, that are more enthusiastic about being clients of Iran than Iran is enthusiastic about being their patron. But Iran is very happy to put those gains in its pocket, right? So I'm not sure that the Iranians will want to give up these geopolitical gains. We'll see. But I think the problem, the basic problem for the administration, this administration, and it's going to be the tension of the last year, is that it wants so many incompatible things. It wants so many things that basically are not consistent with each other, right? It wants Assad out, but it doesn't want the Salafi jihadist opposition in Syria to gain. Right? It wants to open a new page with Iran, but it doesn't want Iranian influence to grow in the region that much. Right? It wants stability in the region, but it still keeps pushing for political change, right? It accepted the Sisi government in Egypt, but not fully, right? It wants all of these contradictory things, and it wants them without being willing to pay a serious price, right? It wants Arab-Israeli peace. Every American administration wants Arab-Israeli peace. But it's not willing to pay the political cost of pushing a very right-wing Israeli government in that direction, right? It wants democracy, but it's not willing to push an Egyptian government that is quite set on its course in that direction. So it wants all sorts of things that are incompatible. So what's it going to concentrate on? I think that to me anyway, its actions tell us better than its words what its priorities are. And its main priority is the Salafi jihadist movement, which Americans see as a threat not only to regional stability, but because of the 9/11 attacks, see as a threat to American security generally. And thus, despite the fact that the administration will talk about all of these incompatible goals, what they're acting on, I think, as their first priority, is to try to degrade, try to contain, and then degrade and roll back the influence of Salafi jihadist movements. First and foremost, the Islamic State, but also Al-Qaeda. And I think that over the next year, that's going to be the thing that we see them acting on. That means airstrikes. It means support for the government in Baghdad in its offensive against the Islamic State. And it means, frankly, I think, real caution in terms of how involved in Syria this administration is going to get.
Right. Thank you. The absence of will to act and invest themselves in those various issues, is that because of domestic politics, or is it fear of getting involved deeper and deeper in the region?
I don't think it's domestic politics. If we look at the candidates running for president, for the most part, almost all of the Republicans argue for a much more aggressive American policy in the Middle East, right. Much more involvement. And I would say that Hillary Clinton is also someone who, according to her track record that we saw as Secretary of State, supporting a more active role in Syria, supporting the intervention in Libya, she, I think, is actually more willing to commit American power to try to affect events in the Middle East than President Obama is. I think that he has a personal reluctance for involvement based upon the fact that what made him president, his opposition to the Iraq War. That's how he beat Hillary Clinton in 2008. And he has basically, I think, he sees Syria through the lens of Iraq. And he doesn't want to get more involved in Syria than he already is. And I think that that and the Salafi jihadist threat are the two things that are going to define this last year in office.
Right, thank you. Shafiq, Gregory kind of alluded to the fact that in the Arab world, the Iran deal is misunderstood. The Iran deal is misunderstood in terms of its impact on us. And it is presented as largely a negative step for the Arab world. As you know, many Arab governments came out almost on the side of Israel as far as this particular issue is concerned, that they'd rather not have the deal than have the deal. Now, some would say this has to do with the way the negotiations were conducted, that the Arab nations, particularly the Gulf states, were left out from day one. The 5+1 led the way. And then only after he reached the deal, he kind of reluctantly inviting them out to explain to them what is it he reached. So it has to do with the how rather than the what that was reached. Or is it just always going to be that we lack trust in Iran based on its action in the region over the last 20 years or so? Arab countries will simply not trust anything that comes from Iran.
So what's the question? What do you want me to do?
I would like you to comment on this to see
to
whether
comment
it is
on your comment.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, basically, do we mistrust? I mean, is there a lack of trust in Iran? Definitely, there is a lack of trust. But I have some problems. This lack of trust with Iran is also generalized on all Shias. And that is not proper. It's problematic. I grew up in a culture that didn't see things this way at all. And I'm not willing to go in that direction, which is to generalize on a community, on a sect in Islam, or any other sect to that. So yes, I have the right to disagree with the Iranian policies, but I don't see them as the policies of Shias. I don't see them representing even every Iranian. Most of the Iranians I meet, and I know, are opposed to the policies of their government. They happen to be Shias, they happen to be Persians, and they happen to be Iranians, and in fact, they would like to see another policy. Now, these Iranians, I mean, it's not like something that allows them to represent their voice, and therefore, so I am definitely, on the one hand, I believe that the nuclear deal was quite an important deal, quite an important step in helping to open up things in a region that is too structured in its old ways. But on the other hand, we should not be able to generalize. And that's what makes me say that I don't believe that whatever happened in Bahrain was an Iranian conspiracy. It was like any other place in the Arab world. People were asking for particular representation and stories and issues and human rights and elections. Now, someone represents a certain faction, has a certain heavy ideology that is linked to Iran or linked to someone else or to Daesh or to whatever. I mean, that's besides the point. The question is, what about these rights? How do we deal with them? So I'm definitely believe that the sectarian issue in the Arab world today and between Shias and Sunnis, or generalization on entire communities, whether they are Alawites or Christians, I mean, you can be against the Assad regime from now until the regime goes, but you cannot be against Alawis as human beings. You cannot be against the children, you cannot be against the elderly, you cannot be against people. These people have nothing to do in the end of the day with the exact behavior of that particular regime. And so as we generalize, we end up with a counter-revolution. We end up with a quagmire. We end up with a situation that cannot but end up with more violence, and more violence, and each one of us becomes similar to the one that he or she is fighting against. Because as we get deeper in violence against each other, in any context, it becomes a civil war, and then the deeper it gets, we become similar to the opponent. We become like the opponent in our generalizations. So I believe that there is a very dire need for a human logic, for a political, human, pragmatic, but human, based on human rights, based on a view of representation, a view of the other's right to exist and to be and to express within a context of an agreed upon political reality. And so as we have gotten into this sectarian situation, it became part of, I mean, we had the Arab Spring, it unified people, it brought certain important elements, but yet the counter-revolution wanted to take that in a different direction. We ended up in several civil wars, and now these civil wars will not end without political solutions and frameworks and compromises. And then maybe go back to the principles that brought, in the beginning, the Arab Spring of people's rights, human rights, representation, elected ministers, elected leaders, et cetera, et cetera.
Sultan, can I ask Shafiq a question about trust? Trust of Iran, tough to talk about given the problems in the region. But how about trust of America? I mean, particularly here in the Gulf, there seems to be a considerable amount of mistrust in American intentions and American policy. Do you think that that's about President Obama, or is it about the United States more generally? Do you think that when the leadership changes in a year and a half, the slate will be clean? Or do you think that there's a deeper mistrust that the United States is, not as an administration, but as a country, changing its approach to the region?
I mean, Greg, I mean, we've known each other for ages now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. So
We're both old.
yes,
Yeah.
and but the truth of the matter, the question is who's trusting and who's not trusting who? Because at the end of the day, are we talking about the people of the Arab world not trusting America? Definitely, the people of the Arab world don't trust the United States of America. The people of the Arab world see how many times, I mean, the United States has used veto power in the United Nations Security Council, what, a couple of hundred
Sure.
times, 250 times?
No, about
60%
Right.
of them is on Palestine,
Right,
is on
about
the
that-
Palestinians. I mean,
About
so-
that, there's no question. I think more about the elites.
So if we talk about peoples, there is lack of trust.
Right.
If we talk about elites, then it depends on the issue. And I have to say that the elites in the region feel a sense of insecurity. Things are coming from down up, things are coming from east to west, west to east, America to the Arab world, Russia, China. It's such an environment, and I could see where that lack of trust would come. And they have been used to a maybe stronger America, more leadership by America, and couldn't explain that also America, through Iraq and through Afghanistan, which the war in Iraq, changing the regime, Afghanistan, under the Bush administration, cost America trillions. I mean, a couple of, 2 trillion. I mean, it's the most disastrous in the end decision historically, will be judged historically. Maybe then lots of people didn't see that, but over history, this is going to look as the worst decision ever because of what it made for America. So I agree with you, Craig, also that President Obama is a reaction to the Bush administration. You go to war all the way. You want to reshape the world in your image. You want to do democracy from up. That's not going to work. But you go, you make wars, you kill people, you change all of that. Now Obama comes and says, I'm going to do none of that. I think you will end up with an American president who's going to say, I'm going to do some of that and some of that. I think America will come back somewhere in the middle.
Maybe we can direct the question to Greg in a different way.
Right.
What are the reasons to trust the United States that you see that has been or can be illustrated in this region over the last 7 years?
Right, and like Shafiq, I want to distinguish between the general populations here and the elites. Because as Shafiq said, and I agree with him 100%, there's a profound popular distrust about American motives, and that's understandable. Because the United States, like every great power, I don't think we're unique here, like every great power, the United States is hypocritical. We say we do things out of general principles and in the interests of the world, and in fact we act according to our own interests as we define them. That doesn't make America worse than other great powers. It just makes us a normal great power. But the elites in this region in particular, in the Gulf, have had a very close relationship with the United States over generations. And what I haven't been able to figure out is whether the distrust and the opposition that I sense and I hear from elites in this region toward the Obama administration's foreign policies, whether that's something that will change with the change of leadership, or whether that the elites have kind of given up on America. My guess is that they haven't. The elites in this part of the world are still very tied to the United States.
They can't.
And look, I mean, when people talk about America, when people in the Gulf say, oh, America's leaving, America is abandoning us, I always say, well, the day that Camp Arif-Jan closes down in Kuwait, the day that the Fifth Fleet leaves Manama, the day that Al Udeid Air Base here in Qatar closes down, the day that the US Navy stops pulling into Jebel Ali in Dubai, the day that American and British Air Forces stop flying into Salalah and Oman, okay, on that day, I grant you, we will have left. But that day is not today or tomorrow or the next day, right? Those bases are there and America is there. I think that if we measure this against, it's always a question of what your baseline is, right? If your baseline is 2006 or 2007 with 170,000 American troops in Iraq, then yes, the American presence in this region is much less. But if your baseline is 2000, right, the year before the 9/11 attacks, America is actually more involved in the Gulf region and the Middle East militarily now than it was in 2000. So it's all a question of baselines. My guess is that leadership in this region will warm to a new American president, no matter who that president is, Hillary Clinton or a Republican. Because I think a new American leadership will, at least at the outset, take a tougher line on Iranian influence in the region, take a tougher line on Syria. Then we'll have to see how exactly they implement that. But I think that there will be, just as there was enormous hope for President Obama to be different from President Bush, George W. Bush, the Bush School of Government is named after George H.W. Bush, not George W. Bush. I would like to make that clear. But just as there was an enormous hope in President Obama as being someone different from President George W. Bush, I think there's going to be hope in the region that a new president will be different from President Obama on the issues that the region disagrees with him about. The one thing, of course, they'll be disappointed on is the Palestinian issue, because whoever comes into office is going to have a better relationship with Israel than the Obama administration has had.
Thank you. Well, let me move you on to the Palestinian issue, because it's, whether it is central to the American administration or not, it's certainly central to our region. And a few years ago, President Obama did make serious effort. He committed his administration to reach a deal between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and he couldn't make it work. Why was it the case that he could not use his influence sufficiently to achieve a deal between the Palestinians and the Israelis?
I think that the basic issue is not his good intentions. I think he entered the presidency with probably the best understanding of the Palestinian issue and the Arab-Israeli conflict more generally of any president since Jimmy Carter. I think that he ran into three obstacles. The first and most important obstacle was he was dealing with an Israeli government that was not going to make the kinds of territorial compromise that would make it possible to have a negotiated settlement on a two-state basis. Right? Israeli politics has shifted to the right over the years, even since the late 1990s when the Clinton administration made the last really serious effort on the Arab-Israeli peace process. And you have an Israeli government that just is not willing to make the necessary territorial compromises. That's one. Two, you had a Palestinian community when Obama came to office that was still divided, right, between Hamas in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, that was unable to speak with one voice. And thus it was difficult for Mahmoud Abbas to enter into a process that inevitably would lead to some kind of compromise, some giving up of elements of the Palestinian agenda. I don't think he had the strength to do that. But the third thing that I think we have to realize is that the Arab-Israeli conflict is just less important for American policymakers than it used to be. Right? From the 1970s through the 1990s, I think American policymakers were driven by the memory of the oil embargo. They were driven by the memory of the fact that Arab-Israeli instability and Arab-Israeli conflict could directly impact Americans at home. I grew up in that era. I remember gas lines, and so do the politicians. But basically, with the failure of the peace process in the 1990s, and the fact that nothing really happened that affected American interests that directly, that was directly associated with that failure, we can argue that all sorts of bad things happened that were indirectly affected by the continuation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But nobody in America really thinks that the failure of the Arab-Israeli peace process under Clinton had any direct negative effects on the United States. And I just think that these days, very few Americans see the Arab-Israeli conflict as something that, if we don't solve it, it's going to come back to bite America. And
very interesting. I think it's actually a scary thought, because it does mean that we're becoming irrelevant in many ways. The fact that, for example, today the region is involved in war in Yemen, and not any country, Saudi Arabia itself is involved in war, and the oil prices is not shifting.
Exactly.
There is no direct impact on the United States,
Right.
so we could continue in our conflicts forever.
One could argue that the region has never been less stable in terms of the various conflicts ongoing, and yet oil is below $50 a barrel.
Yeah. Shafiq, could the Arab countries, could they have done more to allow President Obama the space to succeed in the Arab-Israeli deal? I mean, did they play, in your estimate, their role correctly? Could they have exerted more pressure, done things differently?
I mean, the Arab...
let me just explain, including, for example, in relation to the Iran, their position from Iran. You know, the president has never been bruised by anyone as he had by Netanyahu.
Right.
And what do? We come up in positions that kind of on the side of Netanyahu more than it is on the side of the president. Now, could we have done it differently? Should we have done it differently?
I'm not sure. I see the Arab world at the structural level, at the formal level, a weaker Arab world. Today, 40% of the Arab countries have civil wars, are in a state of total chaos. Others could be in the process. So the Arab world has gone into a vacuum that others will take advantage of, whether it's the US or the Russians or other countries. So the Palestine issue goes back to its basic common denominator. It is an issue of justice. It is an issue of a people. It is an issue of a struggle. And it goes back to the heart of the Arab world, to the heart of the Arab peoples. And I do believe that when you see Maidan al-Tahrir in Egypt in 2011, you see Palestine there. You see it in the activists, and you see it in the way they dressed, and you see it in the Palestinian symbols that they've had. And you see that many of them were schooled in the Palestinian way of resistance, at least the second Intifada, and so some of them who were in and out of Gaza. So I do see the link between the Arab movements, the Arab grassroots movements, the Arab democratic transformation of the future or of the past, 2011, and the Palestine question. I see the link between the Palestine question and the Islamic issues. I mean, no matter how we look at jihadis, the issue of Palestine is on their agenda, no matter how much we agree with many of their way of thinking. No matter how much we disagree with Al-Qaeda, as we don't like, there is a part of Al-Qaeda which is an offshoot of the Palestine question. It's an offshoot of America coming to the region. It's an offshoot of 1990 and 91 and all the issues that happened with it. There are parts of September 11 that history will tell us in the future, maybe, or the future will tell us that there were links, and that these links had to do with other issues and massacres and histories and wars and attacks that are related in one way or another to the Palestine issue. Even those who did it on the ground, some of the names, some of the leading organizers were influenced by the Palestine tragedy. So the deeper you get, you see, it's there.
Yeah.
We may, somebody may, some governments may in the Arab world choose to ignore it. It doesn't exist in a pragmatic one-to-one calculation. But that is very short-sighted. Somebody may choose to go and deal with the Israelis, believing that that's not an issue. The Palestinians take to the streets when they hear that Obama doesn't mention their cause in his speech in the United Nations. For the first time, an American president never mentions the Palestine issue as an issue to be looked at. They take to the streets and begin a new stage of resistance. So Palestine is one of the first issues of the Arab world. It started more than 100 years ago. And when all the Arab world's issues will be addressed and solved, one day, 10, 20, 30 years from now, the Palestine issue will still be an issue of justice by which the Arab world will be, in a way, intertwined with and related to. It's a game changer. It will be there in that context. There are 5-6 million Palestinian Arabs on the ground in Palestine. There are 5-6 million Israeli Jews on the ground in Palestine. That's not going to go away. And there are millions of Palestinians surrounding and millions of Arabs. So even if I want to calculate Iran in one way or another, when Iran gets into some policy, it finds itself through Hezbollah in conflict. So I always say I disagree with Hezbollah in Syria, and I don't disagree with Hezbollah in South Lebanon. And I respect the positions other states take when they champion the cause. The Turkish position, other positions that any country, any state, any project, any Arab nationalist movement in the Arab world, which I think we will come back to in the future, is going to find an issue with Zionism, because it stands for the fragmentation of the Arab world, whether it does it directly or indirectly. It will always feel that insecurity. And so that issue is there. And I see it the people's issue, and not necessarily the countries. And if the countries choose to ignore it, it's a loss for the countries. It's not a loss for the people. It just keeps coming back again, as it is today.
Right, thank you. Let me move to another situation, and then we'll maybe take some questions from Yemen. Is Yemen and the way the United States, this is Gregory, seems to us to turn a blind eye to what's going on in Yemen, both in terms of the conflict, but even the humanitarian needs that are arising, very little spoken about. Any other context, any other conflict like this, the U.S. and movements within the U.S. will be out there, outspoken, trying to say something. Is that being done to please the Arab world and particularly the Gulf countries? And is it being done, you think, in return for the Iranian deal, the misunderstanding that took place there?
Basically, yes. I mean, I think that American policy toward Yemen, with some very small, short historical exceptions, is run as an adjunct or a part of American policy towards Saudi Arabia. So the United States doesn't see Yemen as an independent issue. It sees it through the lens of its relationship with Saudi Arabia. And I think that this administration was extremely anxious and looking for a way to reassure Riyadh in the wake of the negotiations with Iran, to reassure the Saudis that the United States was not, quote unquote, abandoning them. And the United States did this through pretty much 100% support for the Saudi policy in Yemen. Now, occasionally the Americans will say to the Saudis, look, do you have an end game? Do you know how this is going to end? Maybe you should think about this UN process. Maybe you should think about what you want from a negotiated settlement here. Do you really think you're going to fight the Houthis out of Sana'a? And if you fight them out of Sana'a, do you really think you're going to fight them out of Saada? Right? I think the Americans question the Saudi strategy, but they're not about to remove themselves from the Saudis because this is their way of reassuring Riyadh that despite what you see in the our changing relationship with Iran, we are still with you. So Yemen has, I think, again, with a couple of exceptions for the more historically minded we could talk about in questions if we want to. But I basically think American policy toward Yemen is run as part of our policy toward Saudi Arabia.
Right, thank you. And Shafiq, a friend is the person who kind of tell you when you're wrong to your eye in order not to get too involved in a problem. You know? Is the United States being a good friend by allowing the Yemen issue to continue as it is and not really coming up front to Saudi and the Gulf states and say, look, what you're doing here, you're getting involved in a trap, basically, which can ultimately only benefit Iran if the deal continues and the opening continues to happen as it is?
You know, I believe there are no real friendships between states. They're only interests. That has always been the case. And if we base it on friendship, and it's a disaster. So I look at it as interests. They overlap, they don't. That's how states change overnight sometimes, entire policies and strategies. So looking at Yemen, I believe, I mean, from the beginning, that we've lost Yemen much earlier than the war began. We've lost Yemen earlier than that. We should have done a lot of things. I mean, Yemen is part of this region. It's part of the Gulf as well. 1990, 91 was quite a signal. I mean, we should have absorbed Yemen immediately after 1991, 92 at the best of the GCC's integration, to some extent, after the liberation of Kuwait. And yet, Yemen was left, and there were, and so as the Arab Spring comes, we also missed on Yemen. The youth movement could have been built on, and yet the GCC decided to take and give a lot with Ali Saleh himself in order to absorb the atmosphere that came with the democratic transitions in Yemen, and that resulted in former President Ali Saleh making good use of that. And then the Houthis are part of Yemen. They are Yemenis. They have a base of 30% of the population, plus or minus. Yemen also is a tribal society. Yemen has south and north, so there are those in the south who would like independence, totally separation. Yemen also has Qaeda. Yemen also is somewhat a failed state. Yemen also consumes 40% of its water for Al-Qat. So now, having a war in Yemen, to me, is a big problem. It doesn't mean that I personally don't understand how the war started and where it came and how Saudi Arabia felt threatened. But I always ask, could have been another way? And I'm a humble citizen, and I would like to think there is another way, short of war. Because from our experience, at least as we view all the wars in the region and view wars of history as well, including World War I, and there could have been other ways in many of the wars, and humankind end up paying a heavy price while there was another way. Maybe needed more patience, maybe needed sanctions, maybe needed a different position, a pull and push. But unfortunately, it is a war. I see it now as a war of attrition. And I definitely believe we should find a way out, and the only way out in Yemen is a negotiated settlement between all the parties. Now, you tell me, when you want to make a negotiated settlement in any place, Are the Iranians part of it? Directly, indirectly, I would say, from a pragmatic point of view, though I see all the problems of the Iranian regime. But from a pragmatic point of view, they will have to be part of it. Now, you tell me they're 5%, 10%, 20%, 8%, I don't know. Basically, to solve a problem, you need to bring all the components, directly or indirectly, and if you don't, the problem goes on, and we all know who's paying the price now in Yemen. It's definitely the Yemeni people. And the question, after a while, there will not be anything to save in Yemen. In fact, some people even doubt, what can you save? In Syria, for instance, today. And there is a line of thinking, just let it keep, it just goes on and on and on. So to keep hope, you need to save, whether it's in Syria or it's in Yemen or elsewhere. And to say, I want to crush Daesh and crush, etc., you have to present solutions. You can't crush and create massacres for civilian populations as well and behave like Daesh as you crush the Daesh people from whatever kind, from whatever line, from whatever ideology you are. So we need a way that is different to come up with all these solutions. I'm a believer that the Arab world, whether it's in Yemen or elsewhere, has never had weaponry with people and populations in its entire history. Yeah. At least its modern history, to be accurate, as today. And my question is, when all these wars want to end, who's going to give up arms? And where these arms are going to go? And what kind of countries and states will we have? And what are the spillovers to us and to everybody around? And that's where the creativity of political solutions become very important in a region that has gone in that direction to bring about peace and representation and democratization, I believe.
But in all of these crises, it seems that one element of any kind of solution is going to have to be some kind of Saudi-Iranian dialogue. I think you have to bring the Turks in some of these cases as well. And I think that there's a prospect for that. I mean, I don't see Iran and Saudi Arabia as, fundamentally representing sectarian identities that are forever at war with each other, right? As you mentioned, the sectarianization of politics in so much of the Arab world is a recent phenomenon. And I don't think it's driven completely by the Saudis and the Iranians. A lot of this is bottom up. But the Saudis and the Iranians have both taken advantage of this for their own purposes. But it does seem to me that the fundamental driving force in both Iranian and Saudi foreign policy is balance of power politics, not sectarian hatred or sectarian conflict. And at some point, there might be a possibility, particularly with oil prices as low as they are, and the Iranians hurting, I think, more than the Saudis on this, and they have this hope that the lifting of sanctions is going to bring this huge revenue windfall, which I don't think is going to, like you, I don't think that's going to happen, right? Bringing more oil into the market right now is not going to bring the Iranians that much more money. It's just going to keep the price down low. There might be some point at which the Iranians and the Saudis can talk about things, beginning with oil, that could then expand into perhaps political understandings. Now, it's hard to see that right now with the rhetoric about the Hajj disaster, with the sectarian rhetoric from both sides. But I do hold out hope that there will be a point at which the Saudis and the Iranians will be able to deal with one another on a more diplomatic plane and try to at least establish a regional framework for the reduction of some of these domestic conflicts around the Arab world.
Right, thank you. And would the direct intervention of Russia in Syria, would that now change the mood in the Obama administration? Or given the fact that they're in their last year, will just try and pretend nothing's happened and hope for the worst?
It's changed it somewhat already. I mean, there's already more sophisticated weaponry getting to some elements of the Syrian rebellion. And that comes as a result of the Obama administration kind of opening up a little bit more on the supply of those weapons to counter the Russian intervention. But I have a minority view about this in the United States. Many Americans are very upset about this Russian intervention. I see it as basically the last gasps of a dying empire. I mean, I really do see Russia as losing almost all of its clout around the world. And when we talk about kind of Putin's aggressiveness and you know, how shrewd he is and how decisive he is, let's look at where this decisiveness has taken place. It's taken place in Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet and Russian empires for centuries that they had lost. And now Putin is barely scrambling, right, to recover a little bit of influence in the eastern part of Ukraine and in Crimea, and in Syria, which had been a Soviet ally since the 60s, which is, you know, a burden, not a benefit to an outside power. Syria is a burden, it's a cost. Having Syria as an ally is no great strategic benefit to you, it's a cost for you. And it does seem to me that Putin he has a weak hand, he's trying to play it decisively, but in the end, Russia is a fading power. And I think that it's basically just trying to hold on to what little influence it
Except
has
that it gave him for the first time presence in the Mediterranean at the time when
for the first time? I mean, the Soviet Union used to have a Mediterranean fleet.
In recent years.
Yeah, well, let's
At
again,
the
what's our
time when he's-
baseline? Is our baseline the absolute weakness of Russia with the collapse of the Soviet Empire and the chaos in Russia of the 90s? If that's your baseline, yeah, Putin is in a little better shape. But if your baseline is just 10 years earlier than that, in the Soviet Empire, this is a Russia that is much, much reduced in its power, even in this region, right? Even in this region. You know, the people talk about the Russian naval base in Tartus. It's one jetty for a navy that can't project power into the Eastern Mediterranean anymore. I'm not as worried about Russian influence in the region as many other people in the United States are.
Great. Well, on this optimistic
I don't know if it's
point,
optimistic.
we'll take some questions. Please, as you ask your question, if you can introduce yourself, and if you wish also to direct the question to Shafiq or to Gregory, please do so. Faddali.
Thank you. Is it working?
Yes, yes. Go ahead.
My question is to Gregory, basically.
Switch it on, the microphone.
Yeah, the jetty that you're talking about in Tartus is going to be a big naval base, and developments have been underway, and that has become a triggering point for Putin to show off his power. And one thing that generally has not been mentioned in this discussion about Obama's legacy and the look ahead is that Obama's isolationism, in a way, I would say, has led to create this ambitious and very strong Putin that the world and the Middle East will face in the years ahead. And all what you are seeing in Syria is not just manifestation of military might for a shorter term, but it's going to be there, and it's going to be there to stay. Second thing about this repeated reference towards sectarian politics between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think this row or this contest on this antagonism goes back to centuries. It's basically Persian and Arab feud instead of just a sectarian one. It's oversimplification in both cases.
Thank you.
Do you want to collect some
My name is Naveed
more,
Ahmed.
or-
Let's collect two at a time,
Sure,
and then we'll
sure.
come back. Please, yes, in the back.
I have two questions for Professor Gregory. There are those that believe there was a prior understanding between Russia and the U.S. before Russia entered into Syria. What do you think about that? And the second question is, do you think the U.S. the administration will change its strategy after the Russian intervention in Syria?
Thank you. Let's try and answer those now.
Sure.
Greg.
Shafiq, you want to answer those? No.
You go ahead.
Yeah. Too bad. So the question about Russian power in the region and a big naval base in Tartus and a Russian air base in Latakia and all that, we'll see. I mean, we can't say right now, right? I basically see the fundamentals of Russian power as in strategic decline. Right? This is a country whose population growth rate is below replacement rate, where the average life expectancy in the 90s and into the 2000s was actually going down. This is a country that rebuilt itself to some extent on the boom in commodity prices, oil, gold, the other things that Russia produces in terms of raw materials, a commodity price boom that is now busted. Right? It's not an economy that is unlike the Chinese economy, that is able to compete on the world market, except on natural resources. Right? Nobody even wants to buy their arms anymore. It seems to me that Russia is not positioned to do much more than try to defend what it sees as its basic regional interests. I can't see any Middle Eastern country saying, I would rather be a client of Russia than have a good relationship with the United States, aside from Assad. It's hard for me to see how Russia plays the kind of role that the Soviet Union played in the politics of the Middle East, because I don't think Russian power at its base can sustain that. But we'll see. You might be right and I might be wrong, in which case I'm happy to come back 10 years from now and acknowledge that, because I'm not in the government. I can say I'm wrong. And I have tenure, so they can't fire me. So, it's great. Look, Persians versus Arabs, Sunnis versus Shia, you can find almost anything to fight about. Right? You can find almost anything in the world to fight about. I think the important thing for us to recognize is that these differences, while they certainly encourage mistrust on occasion, are not the fundamental reasons for conflict. Because if they were the fundamental reasons for conflict, we would have seen war in this part of the world continuously for 14 centuries. And we haven't. Right? You don't have to go back that far for periods when Iran and the Gulf states they weren't allies, but they had perfectly correct relations with each other, and they weren't fighting wars. And it seems to me that you can deal with these differences if both sides want to. Unfortunately, I think that the thing that has kind of opened up this regional crisis is the collapse of state authority in so many parts of the Arab world. Right? These political vacuums, whether they were kind of natural because of the weakness of Arab states, like in Lebanon or Yemen, or whether because they were created by the United States when we invaded Iraq and destroyed the political infrastructure there, a very bad regime, but we destroyed it and didn't replace it with anything. Or whether out of Syria and Libya collapsing in the Arab Spring. All of these political vacuums have opened up in the region. And one thing we know is that regional powers will intervene in political vacuums to protect their own interests, to advance their own interests, to check the interests of their regional rivals. And this exacerbates, this makes worse, right, the existing mistrust that you point out. So to me, this is not something driven by age-old hatreds. It's something driven by the political context of the current situation. And I think that political context can change. And I hope it does. Prior undertaking between the US and Russia. Boy, if there is one, it was really well hidden, because there is every indication that the Obama administration is about as mad at Putin as it can be. If there is a basis for the United States and Russia to have an understanding on Syria, I think that it's not a, if you will, it's a negative understanding, which is to say, we won't push too hard on Assad, right? And you help get rid of ISIS. But I'm not sure that the Russians are playing their role in that. So if there was a tacit kind of understanding between America and Russia, I think that Washington sees the Russians as not playing their role. And when the I'm sorry, it was, my notes just say U.S. administration change. Will policy towards Syria change, right? I think that you're going to hear much different rhetoric on Syria, both from Hillary Clinton and from any Republican nominee that I think has a chance of getting the nomination. Right? They're both going to be tougher in terms of rhetoric on Russia, on Assad, on Syria. What they will do differently is a different story, because no matter who gets in the White House, there is still this hangover of the Iraq War. There is no stomach for a huge American military commitment to Syria. But I think that what you might see in the next administration is more willingness, less caution in terms of trying to arm elements of the Syrian opposition, which the Obama administration has been very reluctant to do. And I think that there will be, the next administration, whether it's Hillary Clinton or the Republicans, will be more confrontational to the Assad regime.
Just before we take more questions, I have a question here on Twitter addressed to you, Greg, again, and it follows up on this point about the next administration. It specifically asks the question about Trump.
Yeah.
What would his view on the Middle East be?
Boy, that's, you really have to read his mind, because he really doesn't say much that you could say is a rational basis for policy. Mr. Trump's whole approach to foreign policy is, I'm a tough guy. Once I'm president, nobody will mess with us because I'm a tough guy and a great negotiator. But basically, he's a clown. He's a fool. And his profound misunderstanding about the way world politics works is just a really depressing signal of how out of joint the American political system is.
Right.
Right? Now, no one has voted yet. And it will be months until anyone casts the first votes in this process. February 1st in Iowa, February 8th or February 10th, I think, in New Hampshire. And we'll see by then if anyone is willing to vote for this clown. But it is kind of a disturbing sense of the alienation and anger in American politics that this guy who has no qualifications and basically just two ideas, ethnic cleansing of Hispanic Americans, right, and building huge walls around American borders, could even be seriously considered as a presidential candidate.
Thank you so much. We still have 5 minutes, so we'll take a couple of questions.
Please, a question for Shafiq.
Please.
I'm tired.
Please introduce yourself as you speak.
Most of them know me. Dr. Zakaria Matar, economic consultant in Qatar. Okay? I want to ask a question. At the legacy of Obama at the end of his era, is America still the greatest or only a superpower? I think Obama leaving America with a big burden and a lot of problems. We have, as I can tell you, debt problem, $17 trillion. We have energy problems, now the prices are deteriorating. We have ethnic, social. I mean, the spirit of Occupy Wall Street is still till now. A lot of problems, but there are very two big events, remarkable events, which happened in the last year. The first, elections in Egypt yesterday, due to boasting the coup d'etat in Egypt by America. 95% of Egyptians refused the policy of Sisi and America. Also in Palestine, after 20 years of Oslo, and which is called economic peace, this youth, which uprised against Israel and the biased policy of America to Israel, and make what we call it the knives uprising. And this was a bitter output for the policy of America and Obama. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll take, please go ahead. The guy with the beard.
Thank you very much, both of you. The three of you, sorry. My name is Yusuf Zakaria. I'm an international affairs student at Qatar University. So my comment that I would want Dr. Shafiq to comment on would be, you differentiated between the elites and the randoms, which I could not agree more with in the Middle East. But if we would consider the 22 Arab League countries, I would argue easily that in none of the 22 countries there is a link or a representation between the elites and the random people. So I'm more optimistic now that about Obama, now that he's leaving, and I think in the future people will remember Obama. The random people of the Middle East will remember Obama as more of a peacemaker when it comes to the region. Yes, we criticized lots of things that he could have done better, but I think being realistic about it, there is a limitation to what one president can do, even in 2 terms. So I think in few years, scholars of the Arab world, or if you would even like of the Muslim world, if you would argue about Afghanistan as well, we would be more we would sympathize more with policies such as Obama's, and we would think, well, he came in great times that America or the United States were involved in lots of places, and he actually managed to pull the troops back. So I think now that he's leaving, I'm more optimistic, and I think the Arab world would argue that another Obama would be good for the Middle East. So I would like to hear Dr. Shafiq's comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we start with you, Dr. Shafiq, responding to this question, and then we'll come back to the first question.
Well, maybe first I wanted to comment on the issue of Persians and
Sure.
Shias and Sunnis, Persians and Arabs, which you look at Europe over hundreds of years, and you find one slaughter after the other, one massacre after the other, a 30-year war between Catholics and Protestants. You find
the bloodiest continent in the world.
conflicts, 18th century, 17th century, 19th century, 20th century, the worst. I mean, World War I and World War II was a disaster for humanity. No matter how we look at it, and if you go deeper, it was a disaster. And yet nobody has questioned, how did human beings get into that? And therefore, today you look at Europe and you see something else. I think the Middle East will get there at some point, that the Arab world and the Middle East at large will get there. It's lacking for a very simple reason. It's lacking justice. It's lacking equal opportunity. It's lacking policies that address the youth. It's lacking real governance with transparency and accountability and governments that represent. And therefore, could go or stay depending on what the people's wishes are. I think we are getting there. And much of this panorama of war and instability, at the core of it, is the deep, deep injustice that is so deep today in the Arab world, in almost every corner. No equal opportunity, nepotism, all related, all within the family, nothing for the population at large, high unemployment, no future, blocked opportunities, and finally people become, or important grassroots populations, as if they are living, but they are dying. Life has no meaning. So they become suicidal, and they go and they commit something very suicidal with a different group that calls itself Daesh or whatever. I mean, we can read literature that can explain how populations could become suicidal. It's when you take from them the hope of living and the basis by which they can be treated as human beings. And there is much of that in the region. So once that is addressed, Shias and Sunnis and Iranians and Arabs can come a long way together and find a different structure, as much as Turks and Arabs. They also had a history of conflict and could. So I still believe in that, and I think we will get there after phases that may not be happy in the middle. So is America a superpower? It is still a superpower. It is a weaker superpower. It is an injured superpower. It used to be much, there was an American century. We're not anymore in that century. People, I mean, the communication, the internet, the interaction, there is people's powers. These are the real superpower of the future. It's the people, the grassroots. They make a difference, and their politics can make a difference. Yet there is Russia with all its problems. There is China with all its existing potential. There is Brazil. There is others and regions coming together, which eats parts of what used to be the sole superpower or the Soviet American. So it's a different world. But there is a factor at the grassroots that is changing the power structures of the world. Not anymore states are as powerful and as important and as relevant as non-state actors. Today we live in a world where non-state actors have a bigger role, where small groups can have a bigger influence. And I think this whole issue of power, from a political science or from any aspect, social power, political power, citizenship power, has to be looked at closely to see how that can impact our life and the future. So that's when I say elites and people, I see that our elites, it seems to me, are in a state of transition. We are today in the Arab world in a state of transition. And if you close your eye, you open it up, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, there is a whole change of elites. Not anymore, someone will come and stay for 50 years or 40 years and 30 years. That is a byproduct of the Arab Spring. It took over and it destroyed certain paradigms in the Arab world, and we are in a transition, and a new and an emerging paradigm is in process, but in a very painful way.
Thank you very much.
Well, I finally found something to disagree with Shafiq about. I actually see non-state actors as only important when the state either explodes or declines. I mean, why is Daesh the thing that it is? It's because the Iraqi state was in disrepair and destruction, and the Syrian state has, if not collapsed, its authority has shrunk to certain geographical areas within the borders of Syria. Without a doubt, non-state actors play a role in trying to influence how states behave, but they only take the leading role when the state declines or disappears. And thus I see the influence of non-state actors as being much less consistent and much less important over the longer term. I think if we got together in 5 years, we would be if Daesh was still an issue, we would be talking about its decline and what's going to happen to it when it loses its last territorial footholds. And so, to me, it's still the states that drive things, especially at the foreign policy level. And they act on classic balance of power principles. But the thing that makes the Middle East more conflictual, I think, is that so many of these states also are animated by transnational principles, right, that cross borders, that call on citizens not to put their first loyalty to the state in which they live, but to a larger cause, be it Pan-Arabism, be it Islam, be it some other cause, be it Zionism, right? Be it Kurdish identity, be it all sorts of identities that cross borders in the region. And that makes it easier for states and ambitious leaders to say, I can get away with an intervention here. They'll support me over there, right? This goes back even before Gamal Abdel Nasser, right? Nuri Said, the Fertile Crescent, the Hashemites, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Iranian Revolution, now a non-state actor like Daesh, right? There is a mismatch between identity and borders in the region, just like there was in Europe, right? Communism, Nazism, fascism, liberalism, right? National claims beyond borders. These are the things that helped to drive war in 20th century Europe. And then Europe, after a huge bloodbath, as you said, settled down. Population movements, redrawing of borders, a decline of these ideologies, and basically people said, okay, we'll live in the states that we live in. And once that happened, then you could get things like the European Union, and people would put their guns away. That hasn't happened here yet. But I actually think for that kind of thing to happen, you have to have a stronger state. The states have to be able to control their territories and link the interests of their citizens much more directly to them than has been the case. And at that point, then states can start saying, okay, how can we cooperate? Because they won't fear that their neighbors will try to use
Undermine.
Islam or Pan-Arabism or Kurdish nationalism or whatever to undermine them. So I actually think that you need a strengthening of the state before you can get a retreat of the state to some extent. The legacy of Obama, and maybe that'll be the last.
That would be the last.
Khalas.
We've completed the 90 minutes.
Okay, no, Shafiq has to have the last comment. The legacy of Obama. On Palestine, why are we surprised? Right, we talk about American partiality toward Israel. That's a constant. That's always been there, right? It's not going to change. And the interesting thing about this president, I think he was probably the president who was least disposed that way, who was the most understanding about the Palestinian issue upon coming to office, and even he couldn't do much. I think it's because of the circumstances on the ground, the Israeli government, divisions in Palestine, all those kinds of things, and then other issues that pushed it aside in terms of interest. But the coup in Egypt, I think, is a great ending point for my basic thesis about the inconsistencies of American policy under Obama, right? The Obama administration welcomed the Arab Spring, welcomed the removal of Mubarak, welcomed elections. Maybe it didn't welcome the victory of the Muslim Brotherhood, but officially changed policy, right? America was not officially allowed to deal with the Muslim Brotherhood. American diplomats could not officially meet members of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Obama administration said, well, that's over. They just won an election. We've got to deal with them. And then the Obama administration accepted the coup. Right? So who's mad at the Obama administration in Egypt? Sisi's mad because he thinks they backed the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood's mad because they think he backed Sisi. Right? Egyptians in general are mad because whatever side they're on, they see America as being on the other side. This inconsistency, I think, is understandable, right? It's very hard for Americans to say, oh, we don't like elections. Right? It's very hard for Americans to say, we're going to give up on our relationship with Egypt, which has a peace treaty with Israel, which has the Suez Canal, which we use all the time for our military movements in the region, just because a general is in charge. Heck, we dealt with generals from Sadat through Mubarak. This is just another general. This is the inconsistency of American policy. It's built into American policy. So the fact that people in Egypt, right, no matter where they stand on Sisi and the coup, don't like the United States is, I think, a perfect example of this kind of inconsistency with which this administration has been, with which this administration's policies have been rightly charged.
Thank you so much. We'll give the last comment
word
to Shafiq, and as we have already
Very
completed 90
simple,
plus minutes, so we must stop.
Word which basically takes us back to the state. I think the very centralized state, the very strong centralized state is in question. This international NGOs, this WikiLeaks by itself is quite a phenomenon, and when it relates to traditional power. The entire shift in the last 20 years is taking us into a direction of a less centralized and a more decentralized state. The Catalans, the Scots, the situation in different Arab states today is questioning the centralized state, but you could end up with all kinds of combinations. And so what I wanted to emphasize is that I think, will be witnessing a situation by which relation between the center and the periphery will totally be redrawn in the future. And we're seeing some of that in Latin America. We're seeing some of that in Mexico. We're seeing there are areas not even under the state. This Westphalian state, this original traditional state, will not be able to hold everything so powerful. Maybe if it does, it can produce a lot of wars as well. The future, I think things will be pushed more to the neighborhood, to the city, to the baladia, to the grassroots, and people will start finding new ways. The state is a burden the way it is on the economy. It eats up a huge part of the wealth, and it ends up creating such an amazing spending on the armaments and the future. I mean, it's not a Marxian view where there is no state. I believe in the state, but I believe that the existing state is in a big question mark, and the trends of the future will question this more.
Thank you so much. I must say, my understanding from your first reference to the non-state actors, you were referring to the NGO type and people's power, and not necessarily armed non-state actors as in ISIS and others. With this, I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight. And please join me in thanking our speakers for a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. Our next panel will address the issue of Russia and its intervention in Syria. So please keep an eye on our publicity material, and you will get the details as to when and where it will be held. Thank you so much.